We are told a story of industrial absurdity, that for centuries, entire civilizations mobilized on a global scale, risking plague and madness to extract thousands of tons of liquid mercury for a handful of barometers and gold trinkets. The sheer logistical paradox is a cognitive dissonance they expect us to swallow. This was never about mining a metal. It was about controlling the lifeblood of a planetary engine. If you've always felt this hum of untruth in the background of history, as if the official story is a poorly written cover narrative, leave your coordinates in the comments. From where and from when are you watching this transmission? The official story begins to fray at the edges when we stop listening to their words and simply use our eyes. For every crime leaves a scene, and this one is global. The evidence is not buried in forgotten archives. It is hiding in plain sight, in the photographs they themselves took. We are told these are images of progress, of the dawn of the industrial age. We are told a lie. What you are about to see is not the construction of a new world, but the salvage operation of a dead one. Look at the mines of Almaden in Spain or Idria in Slovenia, captured in the stark, honest silver of 19th century photography. No, they found it. They found it, just as they found Almaden. It was an existing facility, a pre-existing node in the network, and the network does not stop there. We leap north, another 4,000 miles, to the Golden Hills of California. Before the gold rush, before the United States even existed as a coast-to-coast entity, there was New Almaden. The name itself is the confession. It's not an original discovery, it's a franchise. A new branch of an old, established firm. New Almaden, Idribe, Huancavelica, Monte Amiata in Italy, the vast cinnabar deposits of the Guizhou province in China. When you plot them on a globe, the pattern emerges. This is not random geology. These are not isolated lucky strikes. They are geodetic points. They are deliberate nodes, placed with intelligent design on the surface of the planet, connected by Earth's own ley lines. This is the unmistakable footprint of a single global civilization, a civilization with the technology to map the planet's energetic grid and the engineering capability to tap into it. We call them Tartarian, not because we know all the details, but because the evidence of a unified, advanced global predecessor demands a name. The fragmentation of this empire into our modern nations is the primary function of the historical reset. The first thing you notice is the men. They are dressed in rags, their faces smudged with dirt and despair. They hold primitive pickaxes and flickering candles, their bodies thin, their posture weary. They are the software of this operation, the human component. And then you look at the hardware. You look at the world they inhabit. They stand before cyclopean galleries carved from living rock with impossible precision. They pose beneath perfectly turned arches that soar into the darkness, an engineering feat that seems to mock the simple tools in their hands. The sheer scale is a declaration of a different power, a different science. The texture of the stone is too smooth, the angles too perfect. The shadows cast by their tiny flames cannot even reach the ceilings of these subterranean cathedrals. This is the peasant paradox, a profound cognitive dissonance that screams at us from the past. These men are not builders. They are inheritors. They are squatters in the engine room of a fallen empire, trying to figure out which levers still work. Look closely at this image. Feel the cold air of the cavern, the weight of the stone above. Do you see a man who just carved a mountain? Or do you see a man lost within one? If you also see the impossibility of this, the glaring mismatch between the creators and the creation, confirm it. They gave us different languages, different histories, and different flags to ensure we would never compare notes and realize we are all living in the provinces of a single, shattered, planetary empire. But the mines were only the source, the arterial wells. A power source requires a distribution network. An engine requires a machine to turn. And this is where the second layer of the Great Deception reveals itself. We must now connect the mines to another global anomaly they have tried to explain away, the star forts, hundreds of them, scattered across the globe, from Osaka, Japan, to the coast of Brazil, to the fields of the Netherlands. The official narrative classifies them as military fortifications, a response to the advent of cannon fire. This is a masterclass in misdirection. Look at their geometry. They are marvels of fractal, symmetrical perfection. Their designs are often more ornate and complex than functionally necessary for defense. Many are located in places of no strategic military value. They are not forts. They are capacitors. They are harmonic resonators. They are cymatic energy plants. The star-like shape is not for deflecting cannonballs. It is for concentrating and broadcasting frequency. This was the other half of the machine. The mines provided the medium, the liquid mercury. The star forts provided the frequency. Mark this video with your like so this evidence cannot be ignored by those who wish to keep us blind. The anomaly extends beyond the mine shaft. We must widen the frame. Observe the structures on the surface, the so-called administrative buildings and gatehouses adjacent to these immense operations. We see windows that should be stories high, now sitting at ankle level, peering out from the dirt like lost eyes. We see grand archways, designed for giants or their machines, half swallowed by the modern street. The first floor has become the basement. This is the quiet, muddy signature of a global cataclysm, a mud flood that did not just deposit silt, but buried an entire layer of reality. This was not a slow accumulation of dirt. It was a sudden burial, an event, a reset. And towering over these half-buried towns, we always find them, the strange, star-shaped fortresses or imposing castles. The official narrative calls them defensive. A logical absurdity. Why would you build the most sophisticated military defenses of the era to protect a simple mine? The truth is far more resonant. These were not forts. They were power plants, containment facilities, harmonic resonators, designed to interface with the liquid energy being drawn from the earth. Their militarization is a cover story, a primitive reinterpretation of their function by a later, less advanced culture that could only see walls and cannons, not capacitors and waveguides. Imagine a network of subterranean conduits, the Mercury rivers, flowing silently beneath our feet, connecting the great mines to these star-shaped power plants. Inside the core of the star fort, a specific sonic frequency was generated, a standing wave of immense power. This frequency resonated through the earth, striking the liquid mercury in the channels, and at that moment of resonance, the mercury would undergo a phase change. It would become something else. A superconductor, a medium for transmitting power and information wirelessly across the planet, using the Earth's own magnetic field as a carrier wave. This is the lost science of the past. The physics of vibration. Cymatics on a planetary scale. The star forts were the pumping hearts, and the mercury rivers were the lifeblood of a living, technological world. A world without wires. A world of free, abundant energy, drawn from the very fabric of the cosmos. This is the technology they inherited, and this is the technology they shut down. The control matrix is not just a system of financial or political power. It is a system of frequency control. They keep humanity in a low vibrational state of fear and division because they know our true potential is resonant. Our ancestors did not build fortresses to kill each other. The stones do not lie, the ground level does not lie. They tell the story of a sudden, catastrophic change. They show us a civilization of profound technological might, and the dazed survivors who came after, picking through the rubble of their own forgotten history. We are looking at the crime scene, and the fingerprints of the original architects are everywhere, even if their names have been erased from time. And so, we arrive at the story, the one they tell us in textbooks, the one repeated in documentaries until it becomes a dull, accepted truth. It is a simple, almost charming narrative, designed for easy consumption. It speaks of the age of discovery, of the Spanish Empire's insatiable thirst for silver from the mountains of the New World, and later, of the feverish gold rushes that built the American West. And at the heart of this story is mercury, the magical liquid metal, the key to unlocking all that treasure. The official history presents this as a straightforward chapter of industrial progress, a simple equation of supply and demand. It is a neat, tidy explanation. And it is, upon the slightest forensic inspection, a logistical fairy tale. A children's story told to adults, insulting the intelligence of anyone who pauses for a single moment to consider the sheer, screaming impossibility of it all. They built resonant structures to power their world, and the evidence is not just in these exotic locations. The signature of this lost architecture is everywhere. It is the ghost in our machine. It's in the strange, out-of-place neoclassical bank on your town square, the old post office that looks like a Roman temple, the courthouse with windows that start at ground level, hinting at a buried floor. These are not just stylistic choices. They are the degraded, misunderstood remnants of the grid's terminal points. They are everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Have you seen them? Have you ever walked past a building in your own city and felt a sense of chronological dissonance, a feeling that it does not belong to the history you were taught? Tell us where. We are mapping the echoes of this lost world, one forgotten structure at a time. The truth is not buried in a distant desert. It is right under your feet. What happens after the music stops? What do the children of a fallen empire do when they awaken in the silent aftermath, surrounded by the breathtaking instruments of a symphony they can no longer hear, and whose purpose they can no longer divine? They become mimics. They become tenants in a palace they believe to be a strangely shaped cave. We are asked to believe that an empire of wooden ships and mule trains orchestrated the largest and most dangerous hazardous materials transport operation in pre-modern history, and did so as a matter of routine. Let us truly visualize this. Let us leave the sterile classroom and stand on the docks of 16th century Seville. We are to imagine fleets of galleons, not laden with silks or spices, but with thousands upon thousands of tons of sloshing, seething liquid mercury. A substance so dense a single flask could rupture a man's spine, so toxic its invisible breath could drive a crew to madness and death before they ever saw land again. These ships, leaking, creaking at the mercy of storms and pirates, were supposedly the tanker trucks of their day, ferrying a river of poison across a treacherous ocean. And once it arrived in the Americas, the story becomes even more fanciful. This river of mercury was then supposedly loaded onto the backs of mules and llamas, carried over treacherous mountain passes, through dense, unforgiving jungles, to remote mining outposts like Potosi. We are expected to accept this narrative without question. We are not to ask about the catastrophic spills that would have rendered entire ecosystems sterile for centuries. We are not to ask about the mountains of shattered iron flasks that should litter these ancient trade routes. This is the human condition, post-reset. We are a cargo cult, living in the shadow of our own forgotten grandeur. After the cataclysm, after the frequency weapons silenced the planetary grid and the mud reclaimed the boulevards, the survivors emerged. They were few. They were scattered. They were amnesiac. They stumbled through the ruins of a global machine, not with the understanding of an engineer, but with the superstitious awe of a primitive tribesman discovering the wreckage of a fallen aircraft. The function was lost. Therefore, a new, lesser function had to be invented. Consider the vast, silent star forts. These titanic cymatic resonators, these power plants of the old world, fell silent. Their intricate geometries, designed to focus and amplify sound and vibration, were no longer understood as acoustic engineering. To the survivor, they were simply impenetrable, strangely shaped walls, so they became what they appeared to be, fortresses. A technology designed to generate planetary harmony was repurposed for tribal warfare. We placed cannons where tuning forks once stood. We stored gunpowder in chambers that once hummed with resonant energy. We turned a power station into a prison, the ultimate act of cognitive dissonance, imprisoning ourselves within the very engine of our former freedom. This is the pattern, the mimetism of the broken. We are not to ask about the pandemic of mercury poisoning that would have decimated the indigenous and colonial populations forced to handle this material with their bare hands. The official record is strangely, conveniently silent on these inevitable consequences. This is the first sign of a cover narrative, when the logical consequences of the story are meticulously erased. Do you truly believe this logistical nightmare was not only possible, but profitable? Or do you, like us, sense the deep cognitive dissonance, the feeling that the script we've been handed is missing its most crucial pages? This then forces us to confront the second pillar of this fragile narrative, the myth of the founder. If the logistics were a fantasy, then the supposed architects of these operations were ghosts. The history books credit Roman ingenuity, or Renaissance visionaries, for the creation and expansion of these colossal minds. They are presented as singular geniuses who, with primitive tools and a flicker of candlelight, conceived and executed these subterranean worlds. This is a profound and deliberate misdirection. It is a narrative scapegoat. These men were not the authors of these places. They were, at best, its first terrified archaeologists. We have searched for the evidence that must exist. A project on the scale of Almaden or Idrija would leave an immense paper trail. The ritualization of forgotten function. And what of the mercury, the liquid silver blood of that dead world? It seeped from fractured subterranean arteries, pooling in the lowest levels of the buried infrastructure. The survivors found it. They saw a liquid metal, a substance that defied their new, primitive understanding of the world. They had no concept of dielectric fluids or etheric conductivity. But they had memory fragments, ghost memories of the old world's reverence for this substance. They remembered it was important. They remembered it was connected to gold, the metal that sheathed the domes of their ancestors. Domes that were not decorative, but were etheric terminals that once glowed with golden light. So they began to experiment. They took the sacred fluid and applied it to the most primitive process they could imagine, grinding up rocks to find shiny yellow flakes. The amalgama process was born. A high-technology circulatory fluid, the lifeblood of a planetary engine, was demoted to a crude solvent for a new, pathetic economy based on scarcity and glitter. They took the blood of a god and used it to wash gravel. The fountains in the courtyards of the old world, which once circulated and cooled this potent liquid as part of a building's energetic metabolism, were now filled with inert water. It would require complex architectural plans, geological surveys, ventilation schematics, pumping mechanisms, and a gradual, documented evolution of mining technology. Where are these records? Where are the treatises on managing a workforce in a perpetually toxic environment? Where are the engineering manuals detailing the construction of those perfect cyclopean archways a kilometer underground? They do not exist. What we have instead is a great silence, an academic void where a library of industrial knowledge should be. This is not an oversight. This is the single most damning piece of evidence we possess. It is the ultimate proof of an inherited technology. You do not find a complete, functioning, advanced system and then retroactively create the origin story. The mines are found, not invented. The so-called founders were salvage crews, stumbling into the dark, rediscovering a pre-existing infrastructure of incomprehensible scale. They were like children finding a dormant power plant, managing to coax a few sparks from its corroding terminals, and then claiming to have invented electricity itself. They were not pioneers, they were inheritors, and the story of their genius is a carefully constructed lie to mask our collective amnesia. It is the engineering of oblivion, a process designed to sever us from our own past. So we are left with a story that has no logistical possibility and no verifiable author. Their intricate plumbing, a marvel of hydraulic engineering, became clogged with silt. Their purpose forgotten, they became merely ornamental. A place to throw a coin and make a wish, a desperate prayer to a machine whose operating manual had been burned. Nowhere is this tragic mimetism more painfully obvious than in the Hermetic tradition of alchemy. We are told alchemy was a proto-science, a mystical and foolish attempt to transmute lead into gold. This is a profound cover narrative. The alchemists were not mystics. They were the last, desperate remnant of the old world's engineering core. They were archaeotechnicians, attempting to reverse engineer a system they could no longer comprehend. Their sacred texts, their emerald tablets, were not philosophical treatises. They were fragmented, corrupted copies of technical manuals and physics primers. They knew Mercury was the key. The texts told them so. They knew it was connected to vibration, to sound, to, as above so below, a distorted memory of resonant frequencies and planetary harmonics. The obsession with turning lead into gold was not about creating wealth. It was a cargo cult ritual, a desperate attempt to replicate the end result of a process they no longer understood. They were trying to get the golden domes to light up again. They were trying to restart the engine. It is a house of cards built on a foundation of sand. They tell us a tale of primitive men achieving impossible feats of engineering and logistics to serve a demand that their own economy could barely support. They present it as the dawn of our industrial age. We see it for what it is, the twilight of a far greater one. The fragmented, misunderstood, and repurposed ruins of a global machine, with its new, bewildered operators spinning fables to explain the incomprehensible power they found slumbering beneath their feet. The question, then, is no longer whether the official narrative is flawed. The question is why this specific, illogical, and easily disproven fairy tale was chosen as the replacement for the truth. What is it that they are so desperate for us not to remember? They tell us the story was simple, a matter of supply and demand. A fable of Spanish galleons and patient mules, hauling a river of liquid silver across the world to quench the thirst of New World minds. It is a neat, tidy narrative. A bedtime story for a sleeping civilization. But like all such stories, it dissolves under the harsh, unforgiving light of a logistical audit. We must now move beyond their comforting words and enter the cold, brutal realm of mathematics. They saw the inert base material, lead, and the desired output, the golden etheric glow, and with the key ingredient, mercury, they tried to force the reaction. They built fires, drew diagrams, and chanted incantations, which were nothing more than misremembered operating procedures. They were like a man who finds a disconnected lamp and, knowing it once produced light, begins rubbing it with oil and praying to it because he has forgotten the concept of electricity. They were not fools, they were orphans, trying to light a candle in the shadow of a dead sun. We see this everywhere. The spires of our cathedrals, reaching for the sky, are echoes of atmospheric energy collectors. We place a cross upon them, a symbol of sacrifice, forgetting they were once symbols of generation. We kneel in buildings with impossible acoustics, designed to heal the body with resonant frequencies, and we fill them with dogmatic sermons of sin and shame. We have ritualized our own ignorance. We have built a culture, a history, a religion, around the act of not understanding. The greatest lie ever told is that we built all this. The sadder truth is that we are merely squatters, and we have decorated our squat with the comforting lies of our own genius. We fear the very substances, the very geometries, the very frequencies that once powered our civilization, because our new masters have taught us to. Because numbers do not have an agenda. They do not bend to ideology. They are the silent witnesses to impossible truths. Let us begin with the heart of the operation, the Almaden mine in Spain. A wound in the earth so profound that it alone produced 1/3 of all the mercury this planet has ever seen. The official narrative, the cover story, insists this colossal output was primarily for the amalgamation of silver in the Americas. A simple chemical process. The ratio is well documented. A pound of mercury, perhaps two, to refine a single pound of silver. Now, let us engage in this thought experiment. Let us take their numbers at face value. The annual production from Almaden, even in the 17th and 18th centuries, was measured not in pounds, but in thousands of tons. Let us be generous and use a conservative figure. If we convert that tonnage into the required silver production to justify it, we are confronted with a figure so staggering it borders on the absurd. We are talking about a mountain of silver being produced every single year that would dwarf the entire known output of the Potosi and Zacatecas mines combined. The official records of silver production, the very records they used to build their timeline, cannot account for even a fraction of the mercury that was being extracted. They have recategorized our inheritance as poison, our science as witchcraft, our history as myth. If this vision of an amnesiac humanity, of a species living in the echo of its own greatness, resonates with a truth you have always felt but could not name, then check if you are subscribed. We need awakened minds around here. We need to piece together these fragments of the manual, because the final act of the great forgetting is to convince the orphan he was never born with an inheritance. And so, we are left as a cargo cult, performing primitive rituals around the divine machinery of our ancestors. But this amnesia, this profound collective ignorance, was it an accident? A slow, gentle decay of knowledge over forgotten centuries? The evidence screams otherwise. This was not a decay. It was a demolition, a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed act of cultural assassination. The Great Reset was not a random cataclysm. It was a targeted strike, aimed at the very heart of the old world's power source. Imagine a sound, a single frequency broadcast across the planet, a chord of pure, weaponized dissonance. This was not an earthquake of rock and tectonic plate. It was a resonant attack on the liquid mercury flowing in the veins of the earth. The target was the global grid. This is not a rounding error, this is a chasm in the ledger, a black hole in their economic model. But the true impossibility is not in the silver, it is in the movement. Let us visualize their logistical fairy tale. Imagine the scene. Tens of thousands of tons of a notoriously dense, toxic liquid metal must first be contained. Then, it must be moved from the deep interior of Spain to the port of Seville. This is a journey of hundreds of kilometers over primitive, often treacherous roads. How many carts would this require? Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. A constant, unbroken train of wooden carts, each groaning under the immense weight of iron flasks filled with quicksilver. And who pulls these carts? Mules and oxen, animals that require food, water, and rest. The logistical train required to feed and maintain the primary transport chain would be an operation of its own, an army of farmers and teamsters working in perfect synchrony. An entire sector of the Spanish economy, of which there is no significant record, would have to exist solely to move this one commodity. We are asked to believe that an empire struggling with communication that took months, and administration that took years, could orchestrate a land-based transport network with the daily precision of a modern courier service. The weapon was a vibration designed to make the planet's blood boil. The mercury, the life-giving dielectric fluid, was turned into a catalyst of destruction. Under this sonic assault, it vibrated with such intensity that the very ground around its subterranean channels lost cohesion. Soil liquefaction on a global scale. This was the true mud flood. Not a deluge of water from the heavens, but a dissolution of the earth from below. Cities did not sink into mud. The mud rose to swallow them. It was the perfect crime, an event that buried the evidence as it was happening, pulling a blanket of earth over the crime scene. The grand boulevards, the ground floors of titanic buildings, the very foundations of a global empire, all sealed beneath a new, false ground level. And as the conduits ruptured, the mercury bled into the soil, creating pockets of genuine toxicity. A convenient excuse, a perfect cover story to declare these sacred sites as hazardous and forbidden for generations to come. But burying the cities was only the first step. The true objective was to bury the memory. The new controllers, the parasites who rose from the ruins, initiated the most comprehensive file burning in history. This wasn't just the destruction of books and maps. It was the systematic erasure of a paradigm. This is the first layer of the logistical paradox. Then, this river of mercury reaches the port. It must be loaded onto wooden sailing ships. Galleons, vessels infamous for leaking, for splintering in storms, for being vulnerable to the slightest structural failure. We are meant to accept that thousands of tons of a metal that dissolves other metals and emits a neurotoxic vapor was routinely stored in the holds of these fragile ships for voyages lasting months across the most violent oceans on the planet. A single cracked flask, a single major leak, would not just be a financial loss. It would be a death sentence for the entire crew. It would turn the ship into a floating coffin, a ghost ship of madmen. Where are the records of these inevitable, catastrophic disasters? Where are the shipping manifests detailing losses that must have been astronomical? There is only the great silence. They want us to believe in perfect containment, perfect transport, perfect safety, using a technology that was centuries away from being invented. The cognitive dissonance deepens when we audit the supply chain. Transporting mercury requires a very specific container, the flask, a standardized pressure-tested vessel of wrought or cast iron. To move the sheer volume extracted from Almaden, an industrial-scale manufacturing base would be required to produce these flasks. In engineering of forgetting, they launched a psychological war on the survivors. The element that once powered their world, the fluid that healed and illuminated, was rebranded. It became the ultimate poison. Mercury, the messenger of the gods, the blood of Tartaria, was recatalogued in the human psyche as a harbinger of madness and death. Public health campaigns, born from a sudden, manufactured terror, became the new gospel. They taught us to fear the very element that promised our freedom. They didn't just drain the rivers of mercury, they poisoned the very memory of what the rivers were for. And then came the final act, the rewriting of the script. The monumental mines were not ancient power stations, they told us, but primitive holes dug by greedy men for a sliver of gold. The grand architecture was not part of a functioning machine, but the gaudy excess of forgotten kings. They created a new history, a narrative of slow, painful progress, from mud huts to skyscrapers, deliberately omitting the global, free energy civilization that came before. They gave us a story of struggle to replace our legacy of effortless mastery. They turned us from heirs into orphans. This entire mechanism of silence, from the resonant weapon to the history book in your hands, was designed for one purpose: to ensure we would never look down, never dig, and never, ever ask what truly flows beneath our feet. Millions of them. We are not talking about a village blacksmith. We are talking about foundries, about quality control, about a metallurgical understanding of containment that simply did not exist in the 16th or 17th centuries. Where were these factories? Where are the archaeological remains of this vast industrial ecosystem that must have existed to support the Mercury trade? They are nowhere, because they were never there. The operators of these mines did not invent the technology of containment. They inherited it. They found the flasks, just as they found the mines. They were scavengers in the engine room of a dead civilization. And what of the environmental and human cost? Primitive mining and transport of a substance this toxic would have left indelible, horrific scars. The land routes from Almaden to Seville should be sterile, dead zones, poisoned for centuries. The port cities should have endemic health crises, stories of madness and tremors passed down through generations. The historical and geological record, however, is strangely quiet. The contamination exists, yes, but it is localized, almost surgical, as if from a catastrophic failure of a once-sealed system, not the slow, dirty bleed of a primitive, ongoing industry. They didn't know how to manage it, but the system they were using was built by someone who did. Silence is their weapon. Sharing this information is our defense. Send this to someone who needs to wake up. The final conclusion, then, is not one of architectural analysis or geological anomaly. It is a conclusion about us, about our very identity. We are a civilization of orphans, living on the scorched and buried foundations of a legacy we cannot even comprehend. We have been meticulously engineered to experience a profound cognitive dissonance, to look upon the ruins of a global power grid and see only primitive castles and quaint fountains. We are taught to celebrate our primitive mastery of fire and combustion, all while we sleepwalk through the silent, dormant engine rooms of a planetary machine. We are the amnesiac heirs, convinced we invented the candle while sitting in the control room of a buried starship. This cosmic orphaning was not an accident. It was the final objective of the Great Reset. The true cataclysm was not the mud, but the subsequent engineering of amnesia. They severed us from our own history, from our own technological inheritance. They took the lifeblood of our ancestors' world, the liquid silver that flowed in the planet's veins, and recodified it as a poison. The fear of Mercury is not a modern medical discovery. It is a psychological weapon, a foundational command in our matrix of control, designed to keep us from ever looking too closely at the source of our lost power. We are looking at the aftermath of a high-technology system being operated by a low-technology culture, the very definition of a cargo cult. So the audit is complete. The numbers do not compute. The transport is a physical impossibility. The required industrial support is a phantom. The environmental evidence points not to primitive industry, but to a contained system's catastrophic failure. We are left with a single terrifying conclusion. The official narrative is a carefully constructed fiction, a cover story designed to hide a truth our minds have been conditioned to reject. The Mercury was not being moved to process silver. The colossal scale of the operation points to a much grander purpose. This was not a commodity, it was fuel. It was the lifeblood of a planetary machine, and the men we see in those old photographs were not builders. They were not pioneers. They were the first wave of a salvage crew, dismantling a network they could never hope to comprehend, misinterpreting its purpose, and selling off its components for trinkets. Mathematics does not lie. It is a pure language. It describes what is possible and what is not. If you can reconcile these figures within the accepted historical framework, if you can locate the phantom factories and the ghost fleets required to make this narrative function, then by all means, present your theory below. They made us fear the very element that once connected us to the resonance of the cosmos. And so, we are left with a choice. We can continue to accept the cover narrative. We can live out our lives as the primitive species they tell us we are, content with the hollow story of slow, linear progress. Or we can begin the work of remembering. This is the great and terrible hope. The truth was not entirely erased. It was merely buried and relabeled. Every star fort is not a monument to war, but a circuit diagram waiting to be read. Every ancient myth of alchemy is not a fable, but a corrupted fragment of a technical manual. Every deep forgotten mine is a puncture wound, still leaking the secrets of a world that was stolen from us. To investigate the Mercury rivers of Tartaria is therefore not a pursuit of conspiracy. It is an act of reclaiming our memory, our dignity, our humanity. It is the understanding that we are not the peak of creation, but the traumatized survivors of a far greater age. The evidence is not in their approved textbooks. It flows, silent and waiting, beneath our feet. The investigation does not stop here. If you feel the resonance of this truth, if you are compelled to continue unearthing what has been hidden, then your work has just begun. We would be fascinated to read a more compelling work of fiction than the one they have given us. The official explanation for the Mercury of Almaden is a logistical fairy tale, a story so fragile it disintegrates under the slightest pressure of mathematical scrutiny. Once you accept this, once you permit yourself to see the lie for what it is, a terrifying but liberating question emerges. If the narrative is a fabrication on this scale, what truth is it designed to conceal? The answer does not lie in a single mine in Spain. The answer is planetary. The cover story is local, because the truth is global. To see it, you must detach from the maps of the world they have given you. You must forget the borders, the flags, the fabricated timelines of national discovery. We must look at the Earth as the builders did, as a single, integrated energetic circuit. Let us begin in Almaden, the supposed epicenter. But we will not stay there. We will now engage in an act of forensic geography. And I must warn you, the vertigo is intentional. From the sun-scorched hills of Spain, we travel northeast, over 1,000 miles, to the dense, ancient forests of Idrija, in modern-day Slovenia. Here, we find the second largest mercury mine in history. There are others. We are finding each other. Welcome to the resistance. And what do we find beneath the ground? The same impossible architecture. The same cyclopean vaulted galleries, carved from solid rock with a precision that scoffs at the official timeline of Renaissance engineering. The same perfectly vertical shafts descending into darkness. The official story claims this was developed independently, another fortunate discovery. But the architectural signature is identical. It is not an echo, it is a duplicate. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. Now hold on. We are about to cross an ocean in a single leap. We travel 6,000 miles over the Atlantic, over the Amazon, and ascend into the crushing altitude of the Peruvian Andes. Here, at nearly 12,000 feet, we find Huancavelica. The Spanish called it La Rica de Oropesa, but the indigenous Quechua had a more honest name for it, the Great Mountain of Death. The official narrative claims the Spanish, barely able to breathe in the thin air, somehow constructed one of the most complex and deep mining operations on the planet, mirroring the techniques of Almaden, a place most of them had never seen. This is not just a logistical paradox. It is an insult to intelligence. We are asked to believe that conquistadors, men who struggled to build rudimentary forts, suddenly became master geologists and subterranean architects in the most hostile environment imaginable.